An operation might be making good money, but maybe the environmental cost is high. Or maybe it's great for the environment, but it's just not economically sustainable for the people working there.
Yeah, I see.
So bridging that gap, seeing how these things interact clearly, that's been critical. And that's really where these Aquaculture Performance Indicators, or APIs, come in. They offer a standard way, a framework to evaluate, and this is key, compare aquaculture systems globally.
A whole new era of communication in the global aquaculture industry is coming. Now you have the brightest minds in aquaculture right in your pocket. And what's best? You can listen to all of them while driving to a farm, traveling, or running errands. It's never been this good, and it's never been this simple. Welcome to the Aquaculture Podcast Show, the first AI-based podcast in aquaculture, where you'll find cutting-edge insights in everything that's working in aquaculture, nutrition, health, and production.
Welcome back to the deep dive. In the world of aquaculture, things are always moving, always innovating. And a big part of that, especially now, is figuring out how we make sure our production systems are truly viable for the long haul.
Exactly.
Aquaculture provides over half the world's aquatic food now, which is huge. So naturally, the conversation turns to sustainability. Not just as a buzzword, right? But something we can actually measure. So today we're diving into what looks like a really pivotal new framework. It's designed to give us that comprehensive, data-driven assessment of aquaculture performance across, all the important dimensions.
And that's something the industry has really been looking for, needing, actually. For a long time, as aquaculture grew so fast, we didn't really have a consistent way, a holistic way, to look at performance across what people often call the triple bottom line.
Right, the environment, economics, and social aspects.
Precisely, that balance.
Yeah.
An operation might be making good money, but maybe the environmental cost is high. Or maybe it's great for the environment, but it's just not economically sustainable for the people working there.
Yeah, I see.
So bridging that gap, seeing how these things interact clearly, that's been critical. And that's really where these Aquaculture Performance Indicators, or APIs, come in. They offer a standard way, a framework to evaluate, and this is key, compare aquaculture systems globally. It brings needed precision.
Okay, APIs, let's unpack that. What exactly are these indicators? What makes them, a big step forward for the industry?
Well, at their core, APIs are a really robust methodology. They've been specifically tailored for aquaculture, learning a lot from the fishery performance indicators, which have worked well in wild fisheries. What makes them powerful, I think, is that they give us this standardized framework. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a huge high-tech industrial farm, maybe using recirculation systems somewhere in, say, Europe or North America.
Or a small scale, maybe artisanal farm, in a place where, frankly, getting detailed data is tough. APIs give us a consistent way to measure and compare. So we can move past just stories or anecdotes and get to actual measurable data. Compare apples to apples, across this incredibly diverse global industry. It's about creating a common language for sustainability performance.
Yeah, that standardization across such different types of farms sounds incredibly difficult to achieve, but like you said, absolutely vital if we want real insights. And you mentioned this framework has two key parts, output and input indicators.
Yes, that's right. They work together to give you that 360-degree view, capturing both what's happening, the results, and maybe why it's happening.
Got it.
So let's maybe start with the output indicators. These are really about measuring the direct results, the outcomes you can see and quantify from a system. And naturally, we often start with environmental performance.
Yeah. So here we're looking closely at metrics that show how the farm interacts with its environment and how efficiently it's using resources. Things like feed use efficiency, how much feed does it take to produce a kilogram of fish or shrimp? That's critical for resource use and waste. We also track water consumption, how much is used, is any recycled, and crucially, the effluent discharge. What's the quality? What's the quantity? How might that affect the surrounding water? Nutrient loading, potential pathogens.
All the big environmental questions.
Exactly. And we also look at potential impacts on wild fish populations, maybe through feed ingredients. And of course, is the farm complying with environmental rules? Quantifying these gives us real data on the farm's ecological footprint.
Okay, that covers the environment. But as critical as that is, you mentioned earlier, an operation has to be economically sound to stick around, right? Even the greenest farm. How do APIs measure that?
Yeah, you nailed it. That's where our economic performance indicators come in. They look at the financial health, the resilience of the farm. So basic things like overall profitability, obviously.
Look.
What are the production costs? What's the revenue?
For bottom line stuff.
The bottom line stuff, yes. But also things like how vulnerable is the farm to price swings? Feed costs go up, or the market price for their fish drops. That volatility is a huge factor.
Sure is.
And we also look at supply chain efficiency.
Yeah.
How well does the product get from the farm to the market? Minimizing waste, maximizing value. These are really fundamental for knowing if a system can weather storms, if it's viable long term. Because without that economic strength, investing in better environmental tech or improving worker conditions, well, it becomes really, really difficult.
Yeah, impossible, probably. And then there's the social side, which often feels like the hardest one to pin down with numbers, but it's so important for the communities involved.
Yep.
How do APIs tackle social performance?
It is complex, you're right, but it's vital. APIs try to make it measurable. So under social performance, we're looking at metrics that hit that human element. Things like farm workers' wages, how do they compare to local living standards, what's their social standing in the community, and really critically, what's their access like to basic services. Education for their kids, healthcare. We also consider the general well-being, working conditions, job security for both the owners and the employees.
So the broader impact.
Exactly. It connects directly to livelihoods, to building human capital, ensuring fairness in the local communities where these farms operate. It's a good reminder that aquaculture isn't just producing food. It's about the people and communities doing the producing.
So those output indicators give us the result, environment, economy, social stuff, the direct performance. But you said that's only half the picture. What about these input indicators? What are they measuring?
Precisely. The inputs are about the underlying conditions, the factors that basically enable good performance, or sometimes, unfortunately, hinder it, even if a farm is trying its best.
Okay, like what kind of factors?
Well, things like the quality of governance. Are the regulations clear? Are they enforced fairly? Is there transparency? We also look at the strength of property rights, land, water, even the fish stock itself. Secure rights give farmers the confidence to invest for the long term.
Right, makes sense.
Then there's the level of co-management or community involvement. Often when the local community is involved, you get better buy-in, shared responsibility. And finally, just the basic infrastructure quality. Is there reliable power, good roads to get product to market, access to processing? All these things play a huge role.
Can you give an example, maybe?
Sure. Imagine a farm scores low on environmental outputs, maybe effluent issues. Looking at the inputs, we might find it's not lack of trying, but maybe weak enforcement of regulations that's governance. Or perhaps they just don't have access to better water treatment tech because the infrastructure isn't there. Or maybe a farm isn't doing well economically, even with good production. The input indicators might show, say, insecure land tenure, so they can't get a loan to invest. Or maybe terrible roads mean high transport costs.
So the inputs help diagnose the root cause.
Exactly. They provide that diagnostic power. They tell you why you might be seeing certain output scores. And that points to where interventions are really needed to help things improve sustainably.
Okay, this is really starting to paint a picture. How does this work in practice then? How do you actually score these things and use them around the world?
It's quite a neat system, actually. Both the output and the input indicators get scored on a standard scale, usually 1 to 5. 5 is optimal, best performance, or ideal conditions.
Simple enough.
Yeah, but here's a really innovative part. Each score doesn't just stand alone. It comes with a confidence level.
A confidence level, why is that?
Well, it's super important because it acknowledges reality. Data just isn't always perfect or easy to get everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Especially in some developing regions. So if good, hard data is scarce, expert judgment people who know the local situation plays a role in assigning the score. And the confidence level basically says how certain we are about that score, given the data we have. It makes the tool usable even when data is limited. You still get valuable insights.
That's clever. And you said this is being used globally?
Oh yeah, it's seen significant uptake already. We've had, I think, 69 detailed API assessments done so far around the world. And collectively, that covers a really big chunk of the industry, over 40% of global production volume, and about 36% of the value.
That's substantial.
It is.
Yeah.
And it spans all sorts of species, fin fish like salmon, tilapia, crustaceans like shrimp, mollusks, oysters, mussels, even seaweed. And importantly, it includes farms in high-income countries with, mature industries, and farms in low to middle-income countries where aquaculture is often critical for development and food security.
Okay, so with that much data from so many places, what are you starting to see? Are there key trends emerging, and what can the industry learn from that?
Yeah, the aggregated data is really starting to tell some interesting stories for everyone involved: farmers, policymakers, researchers. One clear trend, for instance, farms in high-income countries generally tend to score quite well on the environmental indicators.
Why is that typically?
Well, it usually comes down to stricter regulations, more investment in advanced tech like RAS or better effluent treatment, and just generally more capacity to monitor and comply. The whole system, the legal framework, the economics, often pushes towards better environmental performance.
Okay.
On the flip side, we often see systems in lower-income countries facing bigger challenges, particularly on the environmental side and sometimes economically too. And it's usually not for lack of wanting to do better.
Right. It's those input factors again.
Often, yes. It could be less developed infrastructure, unreliable power, bad roads, or maybe less robust governance, meaning regulations aren't applied consistently, or maybe just limited access to the capital or the know-how needed to adopt cleaner, more efficient techniques.
Nice.
The real power here is diagnosis. The data helps pinpoint why there are challenges, which allows for much more targeted support or policy changes, focusing efforts where they'll make the biggest difference, especially in regions where aquaculture has huge growth potential, but needs help tackling those foundational input-level issues.
And tying this back to the bigger picture, this isn't just about getting a score and filing a report, is it? It sounds like it's about changing the conversation.
Absolutely. That's the transformative part. APIs help weave sustainability assessment into the regular ongoing analysis that the industry does. It makes it part of the operational dialogue. So as aquaculture keeps growing, and it needs to, for global food security, it could do so with a much clearer view of its footprint, environmentally and socially, and work to minimize the negative impacts. It creates this feedback loop for continuous improvement. For an industry like ours, constantly expanding to meet demand, having this kind of consistent, actionable data, well, it's essential for growing responsibly and building long-term resilience. It takes sustainability from just an idea, an aspiration, to something you can actually manage and improve day by day.
So just to sum it up then, these Aquaculture Performance Indicators, APIs, they give us a structured, solid, and pretty uniquely comprehensive way to look at and improve aquaculture sustainability, environment, economics, social aspects. Doesn't matter the size of the farm or where it is.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
This kind of tool really empowers everyone.
Yeah.
The farmers managing their sites day to day, the researchers working on new feeds or systems, the policymakers setting the rules, even investors looking for sustainable places to put their money. It helps everyone make better, more informed decisions based on data. And at the end of the day, that should translate directly into better productivity, reducing negative impacts, and better social outcomes across the board. It helps build a more resilient, more responsible global food system.
So as global demand for seafood keeps rising and aquaculture continues to be absolutely vital for protein supply, maybe the question for you, listener, is how will these kinds of standardized data-driven tools like APIs increasingly shape the future? How will they guide the growth and the resilience of our food production systems globally? What new insights might this data unlock down the road for optimizing aquaculture, not just for profit, but truly for both people and the planet?
If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow the Aquaculture Podcast Show on your favorite platform. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook to stay updated on the latest episodes and industry insights. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.